In this video, I'm going to show you 3 lenses that I use to film high quality, sharp videos on my Sony mirrorless cameras. What's going on? My name is Peter Sorellis. I'm a videographer and editor from Toronto, Canada, and specialize in sports videography. And the first lens that I use all the time with my Sony mirrorless cameras, like the A7 IV, the FX30, and the FX3, to get sharp, high quality videos is the Sony 70 to 200 millimeter f4 macro. This is a lens that I've been using since last year. Before it came out, I absolutely loved the original 70 to 200 millimeter lens, and this is basically everything that I loved about that lens, but in a smaller, more convenient package. And you can see that when extended, this lens is actually longer than the original 70 to 200 millimeter f4 from Sony, but when it's fully compact like this, it's much smaller and really convenient for traveling with, which is great because for me, as someone who travels a lot for my work, having a 70 to 200 millimeter lens that can stand upright like this in a camera case is huge. It saves me a ton of space, and like the image quality on this is fantastic. It looks really sharp. The autofocus is fantastic, and I really appreciate the macro capability when filming sports or the type of stuff you normally film with a 70 to 200, usually like action and things that are happening far away. It might not be very predictable, because if I'm filming sports and the subject is coming at me, instead of trying to back up to keep them in focus so that they don't exceed my minimum focusing distance, I can just hang in there and get my shot and know that I'm gonna have something that's in focus no matter what. On top of that, this lens also has a ton of really helpful custom function buttons. So you can see them all right here. We have the autofocus, manual focus toggle. We have a full-time DMF switch, which essentially lets you switch it so that if you want, your manual focus ring can override your autofocus. So while using autofocus, if dynamic manual focusing DMF is on, then when you turn your focus ring, manual focus will take over, and when you stop turning it, autofocus will return. You can also choose what range within the area that this lens can focus in will be used. So you can either use the full range of focusing, or you can use just everything further than 3 meters, which is really useful when you're filming a sport like baseball or MMA, where there's a cage or a net in front of you between you and your subject, and you don't necessarily want your lens to focus on that obstacle. You just want to focus on everything further than 3 meters away to infinity. And then there's also a macro specific feature, and when you have this feature enabled, the lens is only going to focus on stuff that is within the macro field of view. So if you are shooting a specifically macro shot and you don't want the lens to focus on anything beyond that macro range, you can prevent focus hunting by setting it to macro. There's also optical steady shot, which you can turn on and off, which is your in-lens stabilization with Sony. And then there are 3 modes that you can select from for that optical steady shot. On top of that, there's also 3 custom function buttons, 1, 2, and 3. I use these custom function buttons typically to toggle between autofocus and manual focus, so that when I'm holding the lens, if something is going to pass through my frame, I can switch to manual focus, and then my focus doesn't hunt, and I can switch back to autofocus when I'm ready. All in all, it's a super convenient lens to use. It's light, it's portable, it's compact, it's very customizable, the image quality looks good, and a constant f4 is fast enough to use in low light and feel pretty confident, depending on your camera body, of course. So I love this lens. It's one of my most used lenses, and I think it's a great lens in general for just filming really high quality cinematic footage with Sony mirrorless and cinema cameras. The next lens that I absolutely love using with my Sony mirrorless and cinema cameras for high quality sharp videos is the Tamron 35 to 150 f2 to 2.8. This lens is heavy, it's expensive, but oh my goodness, is the quality and versatility worth it. I essentially view this very heavy and very long lens, especially when zoomed out, as really a 2-for-1. I use it as a 35 to 150 f2.8 zoom and a 35 f2 prime. So I can film interviews with this, and I actually filmed an interview with this just a couple days ago, and I can film action with this. It's very versatile for like anything from like filming court sports like basketball and things of that nature to like just walking around a city and doing like street photography if that's your thing. It's sharp throughout the lens. The lens is also essentially parfocal, which means that if you focus on something at 35 mil and then you zoom into 150 mil, that object or item that you focused on will still be in focus, which isn't the case for a lot of lenses. So that's really convenient for doing like crash zooms in on a subject if you're into that type of thing, or just doing like a slow push in optically and not having your focus shift. It has a great build. Again, it does have some custom function buttons. So it has a lock switch right here, which the 70-200 f4 macro that I showed previously also had. I just forgot to show it. It has two custom function. Nope, I lied. It has three custom function buttons. I missed that. So there's a button, there's a button, and there's a button. And then it has an autofocus, manual focus toggle, and three custom modes. All in all, again, a very useful lens. You can even go and customize some of the things in this lens, like the focus throw, by connecting it via USB-C port on the lens. In spite of this USB-C port, it is supposed to be a weather sealed lens, and I have tested that, unfortunately, but it was true. It was weather sealed. So very happy about that. All in all, I couldn't be more pleased with that lens. If there was only one lens that I was able to use for the rest of my life to film everything that I have to film from here until the day that I die, it'd be this lens, because of how versatile it is and how much I know it can do. And because of that, it's a lens that I always have in my kit. The last lens that I used to film sharp, high quality videos with on Sony mirrorless and cinema cameras is this Sony 100 to 400 millimeter f4.5 to 5.6. This is the beefiest, bulkiest lens of the bunch, but it lets you get some really beautiful shots. I've actually been using it with my FX30, a crop sensor camera, so that I can combine the huge reach of this focal range with that crop sensor to get some absolutely beautiful, super tight shots of football players. And for a sport like football where the field is so big, it's actually being like a lifesaver, not only for filming beauty stuff, but also for filming game action from 50 to 70 yards away. Again, this is very customizable. It has this collar on it, which you can take off if you like. It even has, and this is a favorite feature of mine, it even has a focus ring on the outside of the lens here that you can turn to choose the focus throw. So this is what a smooth focus throw looks like, and this is what it looks like when you add a little bit more friction. I find that I usually leave this on the smoothest setting because that's the most convenient for me, and it's still not that smooth, and tight is like really tight. You can crash zoom as hard as you want when this thing is set to tight, and it doesn't get from 100 to 400, actually not even close. But yeah, the optical, like actually image quality of this lens all the way through, I'd say is pretty good. Like I think I filmed some great stuff with this. I will say that the autofocus on this lens, although it's good, it's certainly usable, like I use it all the time, isn't quite as responsive as with the previous two lenses that we've talked about. So what I do sometimes is use those custom function buttons like right here that we talked about previously to switch to manual focus sometimes to help me out, or I use the actual shutter button on the camera to half click my shutter and reset my focus on a subject when needed. If your settings in camera for your autofocus are dialed into how you like them and your responsiveness is turned up and all that type of stuff, then you're going to be fine with it. It's just not like the newest, latest, greatest autofocus if that's something that you're concerned about. And also it is a variable aperture lens, so f4.5 to f5.6 isn't ideal, obviously. So I essentially use this as an f5.6 zoom, which means that it's not going to be great for low light, especially depending on the camera you have. I do use it with the Sony FX30 in nighttime stadium conditions at 60 frames per second with a 1/120 shutter, but I wouldn't go beyond that because you start to introduce a little bit of noise that needs to be cleaned up in post. And I definitely wouldn't film in 120 frames per second in low light with this lens. But if you want a lens that is sharp and that looks really good, you're filming in the daytime, or you're happy to film in 24 frames per second, then this is kind of perfect. Like I absolutely love it. And we'll show you the shortcuts again. This has an autofocus and a manual focus switch. It also can limit your focus from either the full range or everything further than 3 meters. You can turn optical steady shot on or off, and there are 2 modes for your stabilization in the lens. This doesn't have that DMF that we had on the 70-200 f4 macro, which is a newer lens. But in spite of that, I think that this lens is a great get, and it's actually been, of these 3 lenses, probably the one that I've been using the most because I think that the look is just so unique. Anyways, these are 3 lenses that I've been using to film some high quality sharp videos. I've just really been enjoying the process of using all 3 of them. But you let me know in the comments what lenses you've been gravitating towards recently, and if you think there's any that I missed. And if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel because I post videography and video editing tips and tutorial videos similar to this one on a regular basis, and I would love to have you around for that. But that's going to be all for this one. So until next time, peace.